Well, it's September the 18th, and many things are on the agenda. I want to kind of address a series of them. Later on in the video, I'll try to make some comments on the border and a few other topics of interest, and including this monster spending bill that's in works in Congress. But first, I ran across something yesterday which I thought might be interesting to people. There's been a lot of discussion of the current COVID, I call it surge, that's been going on. I think it's kind of reached its peak. But given the confusion of data reporting due to the Labor Day holiday and so forth, it's sort of put a lot of scatter into the charts. I think it's about to stabilize here in a week or so. We'll finally see what the real result is. But anyhow, what I found is that Moderna released some data yesterday, and I thought it was quite interesting about the effectiveness of the Moderna vaccine, which I think is holding up better than Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson in this situation. And basically and it also gives a little perspective on how to think of this, which is the main point I'm getting at, is that I think that a lot of these numbers are being thrown around are kind of meaningless the way they're being presented. And this article kind of put it in a context that makes a lot of sense. And it can maybe help you understand what's really going on. Okay. Basically, the early group of people, which I guess were from late last year, I guess probably people during the trials, that group of people have experienced 77 breakthrough infections per 1,000 people. Or in other words, a way of putting it, that's 7.7% effective per year. In other words, per 1,000 persons year. In other words, adjusting for the time period and adjusting for the number of people, it says that during a course of a year, you would expect that they would have about a 7.7% breakthrough rate. And I believe the more recent group was running at a rate of about 4.9%, which means that the effectiveness of the vaccine does deteriorate over time, but as we can see, it's not catastrophic. I mean, it's still that's still a so-called 92.7% effectiveness, or 92.3, percent effectiveness. Now, here's the thing to understand about what I'm trying to get to is that the effectiveness of this vaccine is also a measure of how much you're exposed to a given environment. So, in other words, if you're involved in a high COVID pandemic type environment, you'll have one result. The actual result will be a lot different if you're in, let's say, an environment where there really isn't a significant amount of disease present, if that makes any sense. In other words, a lot of the vaccines people have had over the years, historically the polio and the whooping cough and all these things, tetanus and the MMR and so forth, all these vaccines that are out there, and which seem to be like almost bulletproof, right? But the thing is, there wasn't a lot, these vaccines are operating in an environment where there really isn't a lot of infection to affect anybody. And so they all have a breakthrough potential is the point. They all have different levels of endurance after you get them, like the flu shot apparently pretty much runs its course within a year or less. Okay. But for a period of many months, it is if the right strains have been chosen in the cocktail, it will provide a lot of protection. If a new strain shows up that wasn't in the cocktail, well, there you go. If you see what I'm getting to. So the point is that these things do have a fairly high degree of effectiveness, but you're going to have breakthrough infections in these things because of this phenomenon. It really is a certain percent of effectiveness per person year exposed to it, which means if you're exposed to the same environment for 2 years, even if the thing doesn't decline, you're going to gain twice the chance of actually having a breakthrough case. Okay? In other words, it's not a fixed number. It's relative to a given environment. And I think that's what maybe it isn't commonly understood by everybody, and therefore they're thinking things, well, these things just don't work. Well, they don't work perfectly. They work against a certain threat environment that you're in. And since there's still quite a bit of it going on right now, you're going to see more breakthrough cases. If the environment were to decline significantly and very little COVID in the country, then your vaccines would prove highly effective. of taking care of those few random events that people run into, if you see what I'm getting to. And so you wouldn't see a lot of the breakthrough cases. And I think that's something that's kind of maybe missed in the mix. Anyway, I'll put a link to the article I'm drawing this information from, and what you're hearing here is my interpretation of it, but the numbers come from that article. I think that helps people understand maybe just a little better. If not, well, you make a comment and ask questions or anything, and I'll see if I can explain what I'm trying to get to here. Okay. By the way, if you like these videos, remember to subscribe if you're on YouTube. Give me a like then, and that helps the algorithm. And of course, you can ring the bell for notifications, as I always say. Another thing we have to get is we're now having an influx of Haitian immigrants, illegals at the border, and now the numbers have come through so much that now the Border Patrol apparently doesn't have the facility to deal with them. So they're just sort of camping out right across the border crossing. And there's something like 10,000 the last count I heard about there. And the Biden administration tried some kind of stunt with trying to ban Fox News' drone that was taking pictures of it. So they managed to hitch a ride on a Texas Department of Public Safety helicopter, took pictures that way. But so at any rate, I just thought it was but it's interesting to see that this is all again due to another Biden policy to basically allow people from Haiti to remain here if they get here. And so the more affluent Haitians, I guess, are getting airplane tickets to somewhere in South America and then coming up through the normal illegal immigration process, along with who knows who else. This is really getting out of control, and there's no real sanity in this administration to deal with it. Apparently it's some deliberate ploy which they're hoping will increase their long-term voter base years down the road, or maybe shorter if they can get their immigration provision into this $3.5 trillion bill that they're working on. And which I guess brings us to that. There, as I can understand, there's a lot of negotiation and arm twisting going on in the House trying to get the necessary number of Democrats to vote for it. Apparently all Republicans are going to vote no, and so essentially they've got to get almost all but one or two Democrats basically voting yes. And apparently that's one of Nancy Pelosi's effective techniques, is twisting arms and threatening people. So we'll see how this turns out. Like I said in my last video, I don't have a lot of hope of blocking it, certainly not in the House. I hope they do. I think this immigration provision, my guess is when it comes to the Senate that the parliamentarian will ditch it under the Byrd rule. But that's a guess. But the reason I would say that is she ditched the $15 minimum wage, and if the argument for including the immigration provision is it will do something for the economy, well, wouldn't the 15 and tax and therefore tax revenue, wouldn't the $15 minimum wage have some kind of similar impact? We would think. So I would think if she's consistent with her earlier ruling, that'll get killed off in the Senate. It's also possible that maybe somebody will vote against it or abstain. And there's an amendment process, I think, that also where almost everybody can put in their amendment, and at 50%, it's a 50-50 Senate. So you'll have to have Harris breaking ties if the Republicans all vote one way and the Democrats vote the other way. If one Democrat votes against the position, presumably, and no Republican goes on the other side, then effectively that amendment will happen. And we can hope that a lot of the bad things in this House bill will get thrown away in the Senate process and will be trimmed down significantly. And certainly hoping this thing about 8 million potential illegal immigrants being legalized is one of the things that gets thrown out. I know that Manchin and certain other senators, I've heard Sinema and maybe even Tester are opposing certain elements of this thing. And we'll have to see what ultimately ends up happening. But anyway, that's a factor that's going on here to consider. The other thing that's kind of hit the news lately is this the drone strike, and or why call UAV such an ugly name? But at any rate, in Afghanistan, that excuse me, that basically ended up killing 10 civilians, including 7 children, as opposed to members of ISIS-K that were supposedly transporting a bomb. And obviously, what happened here is very simple. That the administration, after the death of the 13 Marines, Marines and one sailor, and basically wanted to have a quick strike to save face, and they picked out the fastest target somebody found and messed up and hit the wrong people. So much for the over the horizon thing. But at any rate, I think that's par for the course for the administration. Another politically driven idea that ended up in a mess. Well, at any rate, I'll kind of wrap this up for now, and until next time, we'll keep watching. The next week will be interesting to see what happens on this massive spending thing. For the moment, for the illegal immigration, there seems to be no end in sight.